The air in the council chamber tasted like metal and ozone. Marcus Webb stood alone at the center of the circular platform, surrounded by towering alien representatives who stared down at him with expressions ranging from contempt to hunger. The accused dock was deliberately positioned lower than the council seats, forcing him to look up at his judges. He kept his spine straight and his hands clasped behind his back, refusing to show weakness, even as sweat gathered at his collar. Commander Thex of the Drask Confederation leaned forward, his scaled snout curling into what might have been a smile. His species had evolved from apex predators, and every movement reminded the room of that fact. The human delegation stands accused of 14 counts of treaty violation, resource theft, and unauthorized military expansion. How does Earth plead? Marcus met the reptilian's yellow eyes without flinching. Not guilty on all counts. We request time to present our evidence and await the arrival of our primary representative. A chittering laugh erupted from the Vehl section. Counselor Zurich's, whose insectoid body gleamed under the chamber lights, clicked her mandibles in amusement. Your queen hides while you face judgment? How very human. Perhaps she knows the truth of your crimes. Queen Victoria Kane is en route, Marcus said evenly. Her ship experienced a navigation malfunction in the outer corridor. She will arrive within the hour. Convenient, hissed Thex. He glanced at the other council members, his tail sweeping across the floor in a show of dominance. The tribunal has already reviewed the evidence. Earth has established mining operations in the Crest sector without proper authorization. Your military vessels have been detected in restricted zones. You have violated no fewer than 8 subsections of the Galactic Compact. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Every word was a lie, carefully constructed and coordinated. The Drask, Vehl, and Orth had been circling Earth's interests for months, looking for any excuse to seize the resource-rich territories humanity had legitimately claimed. But without Victoria here to present their defense, his words carried little weight. Those mining operations were approved by the Commerce Subcommittee, Marcus said. We have the documentation. Documentation can be forged, Counselor Orenth intoned. The Orth representative resembled a collection of floating crystals that pulsed with inner light. Its voice echoed from multiple points in space, creating an unsettling harmony. We have testimony from multiple sources confirming Earth's illegal activities. Testimony from species who stand to gain from our removal, Marcus countered. This tribunal is compromised. Thex rose from his seat, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He was nearly 8 feet tall, his muscular frame covered in dark green scales that had turned away blades in a dozen conflicts. You accuse this council of corruption? You, a species barely 2 centuries into space travel? Dare to question our integrity? The other council members watched in silence. The Pelthans, the Core, the Unified Worlds, all species who had nothing to gain from this conflict, remained neutral and quiet. They knew better than to challenge the 3 powers who controlled most of the council's military might. Marcus stood his ground. I accuse no one. I simply request that we wait for Queen Kane before proceeding. Earth has the right to full representation. Earth has the right to nothing, Zurich snapped. Her wings buzzed irritably, creating a sound like grinding metal. Your species arrived in our galaxy demanding respect you have not earned. You claim territories, build weapons, and act as if you are our equals. This ends today. Thex descended from his platform, his claws clicking against the polished floor as he approached Marcus. The guards stationed around the chamber, all Drask soldiers, made no move to intervene. The council demands immediate reparations. You will surrender all mining rights in the Crest sector. You will provide complete military deployment records. You will reduce your fleet presence in council space by 60%. And you will do this now, before your queen arrives to spin more lies. Marcus could feel his heart pounding, but he kept his voice level. I don't have the authority to agree to those terms. Then you are useless. Thex stopped mere inches from Marcus, looming over him. His breath smelled like sulfur and decay. Perhaps we should proceed with sentencing. The council could vote right now to impose sanctions, trade embargoes, military blockades. Your Earth would be isolated within a standard week. Is that what you want, human? What I want, Marcus said quietly, is justice, and I'm willing to wait for it. Orant's crystals pulsed with what might have been amusement. Noble words from a species about to be crushed. Very well. We shall give you 1 hour to contact your queen and beg her to accept our terms. If she does not arrive, or if she refuses, the council will vote. And I think we all know how that vote will proceed. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Marcus knew his communications were being jammed. The Drask controlled the security grid, and they had made sure no messages could reach Victoria's ship. He was alone, stalling for time he might not have, hoping that somehow the Queen would break through. Thex returned to his seat, a satisfied grin on his reptilian face. 1 hour, human. Make your peace with whatever gods you worship. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, scanning the room. The neutral species still said nothing. The conspirators looked triumphant, and somewhere beyond the station's shields, Victoria Kane was racing toward a trap that might already have closed. The minutes crawled past like hours. Marcus stood motionless in the accused dock while the council members engaged in quiet conversation among themselves, occasionally glancing his way with expressions of contempt or pity. Thex made a show of checking a chronometer embedded in his wrist scales, counting down the time with exaggerated attention. 40 minutes passed. At the 55-minute mark, Xerix clicked her mandibles in satisfaction. It appears your queen has abandoned you, human. How fitting. Shall we proceed to the vote? 5 minutes remain, Marcus said. A formality. She will not arrive in time, and even if she does, the outcome is already decided. Thex stood again, spreading his arms wide to address the full council. Let the record show that Earth was given every opportunity to comply. Let it show that humanity chose defiance over cooperation, and let it show that the consequences were just. He was mid-sentence when the main doors opened. The sound was like thunder in the silent chamber, the heavy blast doors separating with a pneumatic hiss that echoed off every surface. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. And through the widening gap walked a woman who seemed to carry the weight of a world in her stride. Queen Victoria Kane stood 6 feet tall in low heels, wearing a formal black suit with silver accents that caught the light like stars. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and controlled strength. She was flanked by 2 royal guards in crimson armor, their weapons holstered but visible, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. She did not hurry, she did not run. She walked with the measured pace of someone who owned every inch of ground beneath her feet. The chamber, so full of noise and aggression moments before, fell absolutely silent. Victoria's eyes swept across the council members, cataloging each one with the precision of a combat computer. When her gaze fell on Thex, the Drask commander actually took a step backward, his predatory confidence evaporating like mist under a harsh sun. She had earned her reputation in the frontier wars, where humanity had fought 3 simultaneous conflicts and emerged victorious against species who had underestimated human resilience. The galaxy knew her name, and the galaxy knew what she was capable of. She reached Marcus's side and placed one hand briefly on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. Then she turned to face the council, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her posture relaxed but radiating absolute authority. "Forgive my tardiness," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite speaking at normal volume. "My ship experienced what I believe was deliberate navigation interference. Curious, given that the Drask military controls this sector's traffic systems?" Thex's scales rippled with barely contained anger. "Your Majesty makes serious accusations." "I make observations, Commander. Accusations will come later, once I've heard the charges against my people." She looked directly at him, and something in her gaze made the massive reptilian shift uncomfortably. "Please, proceed." "I am listening." Orant's crystals flickered. "Earth stands accused of violating the Galactic Compact through unauthorized mining operations, military expansion, and resource theft. The evidence is substantial." "I'm sure it is," Victoria said mildly. "May I see it?" Xerix chittered in frustration. "The evidence has been presented to your diplomat. The council has reviewed and confirmed its authenticity. Your arrival does not change the facts." Victoria smiled, and it was not a warm expression. "Humor me." For the next several minutes, the council presented their case. Mining surveys showing human equipment in restricted zones. Sensor logs of Earth military vessels in prohibited space. Testimony from merchant captains claiming harassment and theft. The evidence mounted, each piece carefully constructed, each lie polished until it gleamed. Victoria listened without interruption, her expression never changing. When they finally finished, she nodded slowly. That is quite a comprehensive case. I assume you'll afford me the same courtesy of presenting my defense? Of course, Thex said, though his tone suggested he considered it a waste of time. The council is nothing if not fair. How reassuring. Victoria gestured, and one of her guards stepped forward, producing a data crystal that glinted in the chamber lights. If I may use the council's projection system? Orinth's hesitation was almost imperceptible, but Victoria noticed. Is there a problem? No problem, the Orth counselor said. Proceed. Victoria inserted the crystal into the central podium, and holographic displays sprang to life around the chamber. The first image showed mining coordinates in the Crest sector, officially approved documentation with timestamps and authorization codes from the Commerce Subcommittee itself. As you can see, Victoria said calmly, every mining claim was properly filed and approved through official channels. The approvals came from Subcommittee Chairman Vorath, a Pelthian representative 3 standard months before our operations began. She advanced to the next image. Military deployment logs. Our vessels were never in restricted zones. They were conducting standard patrols in sectors allocated to Earth Defense Forces under Treaty Provision 7, subsection D. Here are the movement orders, countersigned by the Military Oversight Committee. Thex's tail lashed against the floor. Those documents could be forged. They could, Victoria agreed, but they're not. Would you like me to present the verification codes? They were generated by council systems, after all. Unless you're suggesting your own security protocols are unreliable. The chamber grew tense. Several neutral species were leaning forward now, suddenly interested. Victoria pressed on, pulling up the testimony from the merchant captains. This is particularly interesting, she said. Captain Drask of the Vehl trade vessel Prosperity claims his ship was boarded and robbed by human forces near the Outer Rim, except Prosperity was destroyed in a meteor collision 6 months before the alleged incident. The insurance claim was filed by the Vehl Commerce Guild itself. Xerx's wings buzzed furiously. A clerical error, nothing more. Perhaps. But here's Captain Threll of the Drask freighter Warbringer, claiming similar harassment, except Warbringer has been in dry dock for the past 8 months undergoing repairs. The maintenance logs are public record. Victoria's voice remained pleasant, almost conversational, but each word landed like a hammer blow. It seems every witness against Earth is either dead, fictional, or provably elsewhere during the alleged crimes. She let that sink in for a moment, watching the council members shift uncomfortably. Then she advanced to the final set of files, and her expression hardened. But the real evidence is here. Financial transfers between Drask military accounts and Vehl commercial interests. Coded communications between Orth representatives and mining corporations. A systematic pattern of embezzlement, collusion, and fraud spanning the last 2 standard years. Resources meant for council peacekeeping operations diverted to private accounts. Territories earmarked for colonization by smaller species quietly transferred to Drask, Vehl, and Orth control. And Earth's legitimate claims seized as convenient cover for your theft. The chamber erupted. Neutral species began shouting questions. The Pelthian representative demanded an immediate investigation. The core delegate called for a vote of no confidence. Through it all, Thex, Xerx, and Orinth sat frozen, their faces showing the dawning realization that they had been outmaneuvered. Thex recovered first, his predator instincts kicking in. He rose from his seat and descended toward Victoria, using his size and reputation to try to intimidate her, just as he had intimidated Marcus. These accusations are absurd. You have no proof of intent. Financial transfers happen constantly. You're grasping at straws, human. He moved closer, entering her personal space, looming over her with all the menace his species could muster. Perhaps you should reconsider this course of action. The Drask Confederation does not respond well to threats. Victoria didn't move, didn't step back, didn't even blink. She stood perfectly still, meeting his eyes with a calm that was somehow more terrifying than any show of aggression. Her guards didn't raise their weapons, didn't shift position. They simply stood, watching, waiting. "Commander Thex," Victoria said quietly, "you're standing very close to me. Is that meant to be frightening?" Thex's confidence wavered. He had faced warriors, politicians, and conquerors. He had stared down species renowned for their ferocity, but this human woman, barely reaching his chest in height, looked at him as if he were an insect beneath her notice. "I've fought in 3 wars, Victoria continued, her voice never rising above conversational tones. "I've negotiated with species who consider eating their enemies a sacred duty. I've watched good people die because diplomacy failed. And I've learned that the loudest threats usually come from the weakest positions. So please, Commander, if you have something meaningful to say, say it. Otherwise, step back." For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Thex retreated, his scales flushing darker with barely suppressed rage and, perhaps, a flicker of fear. Victoria turned back to the council. "I have more evidence if needed. Bank records, communication intercepts, testimony from your own people who were brave enough to come forward. But I think we've established the relevant facts. This tribunal was never about justice. It was about seizing Earth's assets and using legal procedure as camouflage for theft." She walked slowly around the chamber floor, addressing each species directly. "The question now is, what happens next? You can proceed with this farce, vote to sanction Earth based on fabricated evidence, and hope we submit quietly. Or you can acknowledge the truth and allow actual justice to proceed." Oranth's crystals pulsed rapidly, and if we choose the former, Earth is one world. The Council represents thousands. What could you possibly do? Victoria smiled again, that cold, dangerous expression. "I was wondering when you'd ask." She touched her wrist comm and the holographic displays shifted to show the space around the council station. 24 warships hung in perfect formation, human vessels bristling with weapons, their drives hot and ready. "The Earth Defense Fleet arrived with me," Victoria said calmly. "They're not here to attack. They're here to ensure this proceeding remains fair and that I leave safely with my diplomat. But I want to be very clear about something. If you sanction Earth, if you attempt to embargo or blockade us, we will consider it an act of war. And while we may be young, while we may be outnumbered, I promise you this, we will make it cost more than you're willing to pay." The neutral species erupted again, some with approval, others with concern. The Pelthian representative stood, her feathers ruffled with agitation. "This is highly irregular. You bring warships to a diplomatic proceeding?" "I brought protection to what I suspected was an ambush," Victoria corrected, "and I was right. The Drask jammed my communications. The Vehl fabricated evidence. The Orth conspired to steal our resources. Tell me, Councillor Peltha, what would you have done?" The Pelthian considered this, then slowly nodded. "I would have done the same." More voices joined in agreement. The neutral bloc, silent and intimidated for so long, suddenly found their courage. They had watched the 3 powers dominate council proceedings for years, pushing through votes and seizing opportunities while smaller species were left with scraps. Now someone had finally stood up to the bullies, and the room's dynamic shifted in an instant. Thex tried to regain control. "This changes nothing. Earth still violated protocols by bringing military vessels into council space without authorization. Actually," Victoria said, pulling up another document, "Treaty Provision 12 allows any member species to deploy defensive forces during formal proceedings if they have reasonable suspicion of prejudice or danger. I filed the proper notification 4 hours ago. It's already been logged and approved by the Treaty Compliance Office." She had outmaneuvered them at every turn, anticipated every objection, closed every loophole. The 3 conspirators had no moves left. Zurex's wings drooped, her earlier aggression deflating. "What do you want, human?" Victoria's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained hard. "I want what we came for. I want these charges against Earth dismissed. I want a full investigation into the financial irregularities I've presented. I want safeguards put in place to prevent this council from being used as a weapon against species who can't defend themselves. And I want it understood, by everyone in this room, that humanity will not be bullied threatened, or manipulated. She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. But more than that, I want this council to remember its purpose. You were formed to facilitate cooperation, to resolve disputes peacefully, to ensure that strength didn't determine right. Somewhere along the way, some of you forgot that. Today is a reminder. The core delegate, a gaseous being contained in an environment suit, spoke in a resonant voice. I move to dismiss all charges against Earth and open a formal investigation into the accusations Queen Kane has presented. Seconded, called the Pelthian representative. Thirded, added a unified world's counselor. The vote was swift and decisive. 43-3, with only Drask, Vehl, and Orth voting against. The charges were dismissed and investigative committees were immediately formed to examine the evidence of corruption. As the session concluded, Thex rose one last time, his voice tight with controlled fury. This is not over, human. The Drask Confederation has a long memory. Victoria turned to face him fully, and when she spoke, her voice carried a finality that silenced any further protest. So do we, Commander. So do we. She collected Marcus with a gesture and walked toward the exit, her guards falling into step behind her. As they passed through the main doors, she heard the chamber erupt into heated discussions, species demanding answers, alliances fracturing, and the beginning of real accountability. Outside in the corridor, Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Victoria glanced at him with something that might have been amusement. Diplomacy usually is. The trick is making sure the other side is more terrified than you are. Did you really suspect they'd try something like this? I knew they would. The Drask have been probing our defenses for months. The Vehl have been spreading rumors about human aggression. The Orth have been buying up mineral rights in sectors they knew we were interested in. This tribunal was inevitable. She paused at a viewport showing the Earth fleet maintaining position around the station. That's why I made sure we were ready. Marcus followed her gaze. And if they'd called your bluff? If they'd voted to sanction us anyway? Victoria's expression went cold and distant. And for a moment Marcus saw the warrior queen who had led humanity through 3 wars and emerged victorious each time. It wouldn't have been a bluff, Marcus. I meant every word. We're done being pushed around. Done being treated as inferiors because we're new to this galaxy. If they want respect, they'll give it. And if they won't give it, we'll take it. They walked in silence for a moment, the implications of her words settling between them. Then Marcus asked the question that had been nagging at him since she'd revealed the fleet. How long have you been planning this? Since the day we joined the council, Victoria said simply. I knew there would be species who saw us as weak, as targets. I knew there would be challenges, both legal and military. So I prepared for both. The evidence gathering took months. The fleet positioning took weeks, but it was necessary. Today proved that. She stopped at an airlock leading to her shuttle, her guards moving ahead to secure the passage. The galaxy is full of bullies, Marcus, species who use size, age, or military might to dominate others. They rely on fear and intimidation because they've never been effectively challenged. But fear is a fragile weapon. It only works until someone refuses to be afraid. Marcus thought about Thex backing away, about Zyrix's deflating aggression, about the neutral species finding their voices once someone had stood up to the powers that had silenced them. You changed something in there today. Not just for us, but for everyone. Victoria nodded slowly. That was the goal. Earth can't fight the entire galaxy. We're strong, but we're not invincible. What we needed was to show that strength comes in many forms, and that being new doesn't mean being weak. We needed to demonstrate that humanity stands for something more than survival. We stand for justice, for fairness, for protecting those who can't protect themselves. And if that doesn't work, she smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. Then we remind them why humans have survived this long. We're adaptable, we're stubborn, and we absolutely refuse to quit. She extended her hand. You did well in there, Marcus. Holding them off until I arrived couldn't have been easy. He shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. I just wish I could have seen Thex's face when your fleet appeared on sensors. Oh, that was recorded, Victoria said with a slight grin. I made sure of it. Intelligence thought it might be useful for training purposes, and possibly for morale. As they boarded the shuttle, Marcus looked back at the council station, at the ships maintaining their positions, at the galaxy that had just learned a very important lesson about humanity. Inside that station, investigations were beginning. Alliances were reforming, and 3 species who had grown comfortable with bullying smaller nations were discovering that their tactics no longer worked. The shuttle detached smoothly, maneuvering through the fleet formation toward Victoria's flagship. Through the viewport, Marcus could see Earth in the distance, a blue jewel hanging in the black. The world that had produced this woman who had just reshaped galactic politics through sheer force of will and meticulous preparation. What happens now? He asked. Victoria settled into her seat, already reviewing reports on a datapad. Now the real work begins. The investigations will take months. There will be political fallout, attempts at retaliation, efforts to undermine what we've accomplished. But we've established our position. We've shown the galaxy that humanity won't be intimidated. And we've given the smaller species hope that the Council can actually serve its intended purpose. She looked up from the datapad, her eyes reflecting the starlight. We've also made enemies, Marcus. Powerful ones. Thex meant what he said about the Drask memory. They won't forget this humiliation. Good, Marcus said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. Let them remember. Let every species that thinks they can push humanity around remember what happened today. Let them remember that we stood our ground, that we fought back with truth and evidence and the courage to stare down bullies twice our size. Let them remember the queen who walked into that chamber and changed everything. Victoria regarded him for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. You're learning, Marcus. Diplomacy isn't just about making friends. Sometimes it's about making the right enemies and ensuring they know exactly what they're dealing with. The shuttle docked with the flagship, and as they disembarked, they were met by Admiral Chen, commander of the Earth Defense Fleet. She saluted crisply. Your Majesty, the fleet stands ready. What are your orders? Stand down from alert status, but maintain position for another 6 hours, Victoria instructed. Make sure the Council knows we're not running away the moment the crisis is over. We'll leave when I'm satisfied that our point has been made and our people are safe. Understood, ma'am. As Admiral Chen departed to relay the orders, Victoria turned to Marcus one final time. Get some rest. You've earned it. Tomorrow we'll start working on the follow-up, making sure today's victory doesn't become tomorrow's empty gesture. But for now, take a moment to appreciate what we accomplished. Marcus nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with him now that the adrenaline was fading. As he headed toward his quarters, he passed a viewport showing the Council station. Lights flickered across its surface, the glow of thousands of beings going about their business, unaware of how close they'd come to witnessing either humanity's subjugation or the beginning of a war that would have consumed the sector. Instead, they had witnessed something else entirely. They had seen a queen walk into a room full of enemies and turn the tables through preparation, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice. They had seen bullies confronted and defeated not through violence but through truth and the credible threat of consequences. They had seen humanity declare, in no uncertain terms, that it would not be pushed aside or pushed around. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds and 100 stations, that message was already spreading. The story of the human queen who had faced down the Council's strongest powers and emerged victorious. The tale of how Earth's newest member had reminded ancient species what justice actually meant. The legend of Victoria Kane was growing, and with it, humanity's reputation as a force to be reckoned with. In his quarters, Marcus finally allowed himself to collapse onto his bunk, his mind still racing through the events of the day. He thought about Thex's retreat, about the neutral species finding their voices, about Victoria's calm certainty in the face of overwhelming hostility. He thought about the fleet waiting silently in the dark, a promise and a warning combined. And he thought about tomorrow, when the real work would begin. When they would have to follow through on everything they'd started to ensure that today's victory became a lasting change rather than a temporary setback for those who preferred the old ways. It would be difficult, perhaps dangerous. But as he drifted towards sleep, Marcus found himself smiling, because humanity had shown the galaxy something important today. They had shown that size didn't matter as much as courage, that age didn't matter as much as justice, that the loudest voice didn't always win when truth was on your side, and they had shown that when humans said they wouldn't be bullied, they meant it. The message was clear, resonating through council chambers and military headquarters, through trade guilds and diplomatic corps, through every corner of the galactic community. Earth had arrived, and Earth would not be moved. Not by threats, not by intimidation, not by conspiracies or kangaroo courts. The bullies had been stopped, not with violence but with something far more powerful. The unshakable will of a species that had clawed its way to the stars and refused to bow to anyone who thought humanity's youth meant weakness. Queen Victoria Kane had entered the room, and nothing would ever be the same.